Sup y'all, Anthony Fantano, the internet's busiest music nerd here, and just woke up not too long ago, and just getting straight into doing this new classic review over here because here we have reviews for breakfast. Let's do this. My Bloody Valentine Loveless. These guys are a rock band hailing from Dublin, Ireland, and this album is probably the most seminal shoegaze album ever. However, while this LP does pretty much lay the groundwork for a musical movement, I would not say that Loveless is like an island of musical thought or completely unorthodox. For one, shoegaze itself is kind of an offshoot of a lot of musical styles that were around the time of its inception: neo-psychedelia, noise pop, dream pop, and it's not entirely difficult to imagine the existence of Loveless when you consider that the release of this album was closely preceded by other releases from bands like The Pastels, Sonic Youth, The Sundays, the Jesus and Mary Chain, Stone Roses, Spacemen 3, and Galaxy 500. And the band themselves didn't just pull this album out of thin air. They built up to the release of this album with, a debut album, but mostly a series of EPs that kind of evolved My Bloody Valentine from a gothic post-punk band to a musical act that embraced the tenets of noisiness, lo-fi recordings, and hazy walls of effects. The fact that all of those things had happened before this LP actually makes Loveless arrive at really the perfect time. Is that a wood chipper? At the time of the release of Loveless, My Bloody Valentine was Belinda Butcher, who was on guitar and vocals, Kevin Shield, guitar vocals, who also brought a sampler into the picture, plus he co-produced this LP with the band's drummer Colum, Debbie's on bass. To put it simply, at least in regards to this album, I would say shoegaze is a genre that sounds exactly like how this cover looks. We have an image here that, if we look at it long enough, it becomes clear that it is a guitar, but it's slathered with all of these just eye-seducing waves of pink smog. And these waves are so plentiful to the point where it obscures the guitar, but also kind of makes you see the guitar in a different light. And the act of obscuring an image or just obscuring an original thought or idea or sound is something that we do a lot today in modern media. From bands shooting their music videos on 9mm or on VHS, or people loving to take Polaroid pictures or even Instagram pictures with smudgy filters, intentionally making the picture look more grainy. There's plenty of lo-fi music out there that intentionally shoots for a dirtier sound. There's been a huge revival in terms of 90s boom bap flavored hip-hop instrumentals because a lot of those drum timbres back then had a dirtier feel to them. My Bloody Valentine did not invent the idea of obscuring an image or a sound for artistic effect, but on this LP they definitely took it to such a creative extreme that it became just inspiring and kind of jaw-dropping. It's the act of obscuring that actually makes this LP interesting. If you listen to the opening track on this LP and your only thought is, man, this guitar chord progression is pretty slow and boring, and the vocal is kind of quiet and underwhelming, then you're doing it wrong. Not to say that if you don't like this album, then you just don't get it, or that you need to be in love with this LP. I will admit that if this entire album were to be acoustic, there'd be a good chunk of songs on here that would be pretty boring. But that's because Loveless is an album that is not song-focused as much as it is sound-focused. What really makes the track Only Shallow so enticing are the thick, heavy, massive guitar riffs that open the track up, which is backed up with all these wailing shots of feedback of different shapes and sizes. That leads in all these bright, compressed chords and just miscellaneous levels of fuzz that can only really be separated mentally in sort of your mind's eye with dozens and dozens and dozens of listens. From the very start, this album is just kind of melting my grasp of the concept of sound before my very ears. And while this album does have songs like this one that are loud and that are thick, I wouldn't exactly say that Loveless really kind of rocks. It's not a fast-paced album. It's not an album that has a ton of momentum. Rather, it is very mid-paced, kind of chill, sort of relaxing in a way. It's a very static album. It's a very psychedelic album. It's kind of like staring into space at all of these colors just kind of appearing before your eyes, which of course are brought there courtesy of whatever hallucinogenic drug you just ingested. Trying to make a heavenly album with all of these loud, sort of ear-shattering sounds doesn't exactly look like it would be an easy thing to do on paper, but yet it works so well, at least in this instance of practice. Now, as far as the remaining 10 tracks on this album goes, My Bloody Valentine just kind of looks for a series of different ways to liquefy and overblow all of these simple and somewhat shy rock and pop songs. The song Loomer is especially viscous because of its lack of drums. I feel like I'm just sort of dipping my arms all the way up to my elbows in like a vat of molasses or something like that when I put this track on. And the way the guitar chords hum on the track, To Hear Knows When, it just feels like TV static, and the way it sort of moves and shifts over the song, it's really sort of surreal. The guitar sounds that Kevin Shields and company were coming together with were just insane. Essentially, this guitar tone that is just sort of wavy but also sharp but also light is really one of the weirdest and most psychedelic drones I've ever heard in my life. The track When You Sleep is really one of the clearer and just more straightforward songs on here, but still the hook on that track is haunted by all these spectral guitar noises that sort of overshadow the song again. The sound is just so weird and just so unique and otherworldly that it becomes captivating to me anyway. There are a lot of tracks on this LP that I feel kind of follow the same blueprint of this track. I Only Said is another example. Another standout though is definitely the track Sometimes, which is one of my favorites on here, a beautiful little tune, and maybe the closest that this LP comes to like an acoustic ballad. And the way that the song is written, especially in terms of the melody, it sounds like a track that the Smashing Pumpkins would produce much more clearly just a few years later. The guitar drones on the track Blown a Wish are especially icy and just glossy, and the closing track on here, Soon, one of the longest on this LP, is one of my favorites, and for me really the first time since the opening track that I actually feel like I'm hearing a drum beat that rocks, that isn't just very still, plain, and kind of rigid. I mean, I'm really kind of hearing a danceable groove on this track, and My Bloody Valentine really milks that as they're finishing off this LP. Now, as much as I do love this album and do think it is intensely creative and unique, I don't think it's for everybody because of the sheer fact that it puts an extreme priority on sonic properties as opposed to songwriting. While when it comes to tune and melody and chord progression, My Bloody Valentine does kind of present a limited set of ideas on Loveless, I do think there is more than one way to skin a cat. You don't just have to write songs with a melody. I mean, what they were really trying to do on this LP is compose songs with a certain kind of sound, and you can't really argue that that didn't happen considering just how much this album stands out. So if you're looking for some pretty heavenly light rock and pop with some really, really detailed and mind-altering sonic manipulations, then most definitely give this a listen. If you have heard My Bloody Valentine's Loveless, what do you think of this LP? Love it, hate it, why? And what should I review next? Anthony Fantano, MBV, forever.